Hello everyone and welcome back to the ReQuest! I'm Captain Logan, and joining me as always is the magnanimous Austin the Day Ghost.
Yo.
What's up everybody? Tonight we're doing more comics. We've had a almost unprecedented number of comics on the ReQuest lately. We've been doing quite a few of these, and I want to say thanks a bunch to Josh Golisano Doolittle for asking for tonight's comic offering. We're going to be tackling Thor 131 through 136 from 1966. Good old 1966. Cannot get away from this date. It's where a lot of my favorite things happen, things from before I was born. Batman 66, Star Trek. It's all about the mid-60s for me, and we're going to be talking about issues that introduce I don't know actually if both of these major villains are introduced here, if one of them was there before, but
No, they are, because I assumed this was not the first appearance of High Evolutionary, and then I looked them up, and it is.
Yeah, it played like it, but I didn't look that up. I was going to ask you about it, because right before we started, I was like, oh, I didn't look into that. But anyway, so we've got Guardians movie villains introduced in early Lee Kirby Thor. Not just one, but two of them. We're going to be talking about the first appearance of High Evolutionary, who, of course, appears in the most recent Guardians movie, which we've not reviewed yet. We're going to be doing that on Sunday, and I'm going to see it again this weekend, and then we're going to talk about it Sunday. And then also the first appearance of Ego the Living Planet. And there's even a whole bunch of other interesting things that we're kind of familiar with in Marvel. It's nuts just how much is crammed into these 5 issues, Austin.
I know, it's crazy. And there were certain things from movies specifically that I was not expecting to see us hit in these that we get. Like, there's a ton of first appearance stuff here.
Yeah. It's wild. This is not a story arc that I've ever heard referenced directly, like people talking about, but it's oddly really important for lore. Like, this is a real world-building heavy kind of arc, and it feels a lot like Stan Lee and Kirby, of course, throwing stuff at the wall to see what'll stick, and it all did. Or at least a lot of it did. Like, maybe
There's like
not
one exception.
Maybe not Tana so much, but everything else.
Yeah. No, those aliens didn't stick, but everything else.
Yeah,
I know, it's crazy. And
the colonizers.
And this is so Kirby leaves Thor for a bit, and then he comes back. And I've heard that like when Kirby comes back, that is like in the top 3 Lee books. Like right up there with Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. So like we're right into where I've heard this starts to get good.
Okay, cool. I appreciate that context because I've never read real early Thor.
And I've read the first few issues and it's not great.
I've never been a giant Thor guy, and I reviewed Simonson years ago, and that's about the earliest I have really gone. So I'm rusty on that stuff anyway, but I'm real spotty when it comes to this character, and I'm always surprised by how much stuff I like is introduced or just wins its way quite a bit into Thor comics.
No, absolutely. Well, and I assumed High Evolutionary started with Fantastic Four.
I would have thought that too.
I think he goes over there eventually like Ego does, but
I'm going to assume there's kind of a reinvention of both of these characters that happens. Particularly High Evolutionary. This cannot be what he's like later on. He is way too malevolent in this to be what I think of as High Evolutionary, and I'm sure Gunn reinvents him to some degree too. Like maybe he's more sadistic in that movie than he ever is anywhere else. I don't actually know that, but that's a character that I remember referenced in things that will occasionally like rear his ugly head in a couple of things that I've read. But I've never really read that character.
No, for sure. No, it's really weird because I feel like Ego, like they get immediately, like it's just like boom, here he is, and
yeah, that's true.
Not much has really changed. Like we've maybe like tweaked things a little
bit.
I
meant mostly just in his look, because I'm used to Ego not having as much of an actual human face. Like that one shot you get of him in Guardians 2 of the planet where he's like subtly got eyes and again kind of a creepy, angry mouth. Like that's what I think of as Ego. And here he's like a bearded man, like photorealistic in the shape of a planet.
Well, it's weird too, because sometimes like it feels like his face on like a wall of the planet, which is more of what you get at the end of that movie, when they're all
Yeah.
fighting him. And I thought that was kind of interesting. But then High Evolutionary both simultaneously feels like they know exactly who that character is and not at all. It's really strange.
Josh says High Evolutionary shows up in a lot of places in many characters' books, which is true, of course, of a lot of villains, but I don't think of him, and I don't think most people do, as a Thor villain in the first place.
Mhm. No,
So,
absolutely.
got a real education here. I mean, most of what I took from this is just where certain things start and what certain things are like when they're initially introduced. And as always, when I look at Kirby stuff, but like especially with this, just how insanely imaginative that guy was. It's again, it's some of like the most just wild ideas and cool looking things and like sheer amount of detail that I've ever seen crammed into this few number of issues from Kirby. And that's including like the original Galactus trilogy, which this references, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about that because it's very bittersweet for me.
Yeah, and you get like the crazy machinery, like that panel you just had on the screen, and
Yes.
then with Ego, of course, you get like big crazy landscape shots, some really pretty stuff, and some just like really inventive, both layouts and just art in general, especially compared to what was coming out at that time. Like there's the one big shot of Ego's planet that's like a two-page spread, and that's like one of the earliest two-page spreads I can think of. Like that's
Yeah.
not something we did very often.
Yeah, and there's a lot of splash pages in this.
Mhm. Oh yeah. No, there's definitely a lot of like, look how big the scale of this
Yeah,
is.
it's real grand. It's super dynamic everywhere. As far as the detail goes, circuitry and stuff, I've never thought to compare uh, Kirby to Windsor Smith, but that guy is looking at Kirby in ways I never thought of before.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I mean,
Right?
yeah.
When you go back to Weapon X and stuff.
Mhm.
Like, I never had
Well,
that thought until looking at this, but I'm like, oh, Barry Windsor Smith really likes Kirby. I guess everybody likes Kirby, but you know what I mean?
that's what I was gonna say is I think every comic book artist, to some degree, has some Kirby in them.
Even if they're in a very different kind of genre from what Kirby was usually drawing.
Exactly, yeah. He's kind of like the man that like everybody talks about, and they're like, oh yeah, everybody loves Kirby. Like his art is so
Yeah, it
influential.
becomes almost a cliche where it's
Mhm.
like if you don't read comics and you hear a lot of people talk about how important Kirby is, you think, oh, if I just say the word Kirby, people will think I know comic books. Like that's the guy you go, especially when you're talking about art.
Mhm.
Of course, naturally.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my big takeaways from this is just how high science fantasy Thor is, and like has so much like science fiction elements than just sword and sorcery fantasy, which like obviously is a thing I know, but when you look at Simonson say it's much like there's science fiction elements there certainly, and it gets as quirky as this in certain places, but especially with Frog Thor and stuff like that. But for the most part, it feels much more like the kind of fantasy that you'd be at home with if you like read a lot of fantasy novels or just going back to like standard Norse mythology and stuff. And this I was more at home with than some other Thor stuff I've looked at because it's Kirby doing what he does with Fourth World and everything else, except his main protagonist happens to be part of a pantheon of gods.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about their Thor, right? Because I was saying this to both Josh and Dan on our Discord the other day, which is that I feel like Marvel's Thor here, like, is an idea that shouldn't work. Like, you take this kind of Norse hero and you throw him into this like crazy sci-fi world, but it just kind of does. And what they told me is that because you have like the main issue and then you have like a backup story at the end of each one, and from my understanding is the main issues are all like big sci-fi stuff, and then the back issues are all the fantasy side. And
Okay.
it's interesting you bring up the fourth world
And
stuff
yeah, I didn't
because
look at the backup features.
it's nothing too crazy. There's like a small story about them fighting a dragon. They're all like 4 pages, so they're not nothing crazy.
I wasn't sure if you were going to look at that, and I had kind of limited time, and I knew that Josh asked for this for
I
this story.
figured you wouldn't. You wouldn't, and like this is the main stuff to talk about, anyways. I did take a look at them, and like they're fun.
I
nothing
glanced at
crazy.
some of the art, and I was like, "Oh, Fing Fang Foom," and then I looked at it closer. Oh, it's not Fing Fang Foom. Okay.
I had the exact same thing. I was like, "Oh my god, we're going even farther into Guardians because he's in the game." So I was
oh,
like,
is he really? Ah, spoilers! I didn't know that.
"Oh, sorry."
That's okay. I don't know when I'm gonna get back to that, but
They mentioned him in the first level you played.
I don't remember that.
But yeah, it's funny though because you mentioned the fourth world stuff because that was supposed to spin off of Thor. So like this.
Oh,
like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, it's my understanding that one of the Thor issues ends with like next issue like Dark Side and New Gods or something like that, or like the New Gods, and then Stanley's like, "Yeah, no, you're not doing that," and then Kirby leaves and he takes it on his own.
You know what? Now that you say that, I've heard that story, but that it was supposed to be Marvel first, but I didn't know specifically like spinning out of Thor.
Yeah, so it's my understanding that like a lot of the Thor characters were going to be killed off and like replaced with the New Gods, and it was good, like molded into those characters. I don't know exactly how that would line up, like who's who, but like there is like an Odin type figure in the New Gods.
Yeah. Is that Highfather?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've not read a lot of Fourth World, like I haven't read like Fourth World by itself, but obviously I've read stuff with where those characters show up.
Mm-hmm.
Like
yeah, no, exactly.
Superman and Justice League things and Metron and
what I was reading not that long ago, but it was like, here's the origin of the New Gods. There was Asgard and it exploded. And I was like, oh, so he just still kept that part of it.
Oh, that's funny. Well, and what's nice about that is that's not stuff that Marvel technically owns if you want to just reference the names, because it's just Norse mythology. So like DC could have its own. DC could have its own Thor if they really wanted to.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. No, and the Greek mythology stuff is really big with Wonder Woman, and of course Hercules is in a big story with Thor. Right before this, that we see in the first issue.
Yeah, and both the big two will go to major Greek mythology characters. So some of those, I mean, they don't cross; they're not the same character, but some of them they have like like I think there's a Zeus in both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly,
etc. Anyway, let's get back to this. So we are stuck on art in a way we never are. Like 15 minutes in, we haven't even talked story at all, which is very unlike us. We get complaints all the time that we don't talk enough about art. Like, here you go, folks. We are stuck on it because we got beautiful, fantastic Kirby that looks like stuff that should have taken him like 3-4 months an issue to draw that he did in like the back half of a weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
And that just makes it more impressive. I want to talk about these pages or these big panels that look like multimedia. I don't know how else to describe them. I don't even know how exactly these are rendered, but the contrast on this page in particular is fascinating to me, where you've got these like 2D flat pieces of artwork that's your standard Kirby stuff, and just what art looks like at Marvel right now. And then he goes to these much more like three-dimensionally looking rendered things that almost look like collages or something, like you cut out like felt or something and put it all on the page. I don't know how he's making these exactly. It's not watercolor, it's not pastel, it might be painted. Mm-hmm. It's probably
like the dots
painted
that you would get later on in comics.
Yeah,
you weren't really doing yet. No, there's some really inventive stuff that I was like, it blew my mind when we got to stuff like this panel at the bottom here, and specifically when we first see Ego.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. This looks to me in particular like a cover for a sci-fi pulp magazine in the 30s or 40s. Mm-hmm. And yet you had a lot of like sci-fi book covers and things that were kind of made to look like this. And I'm going to assume that Kirby himself still made these. And the way it felt while reading, Austin, was like 2D animated movies that go to 3D for the action.
Yeah, or this specifically is like Futurama, where it's like 2D animated, but some of the space stuff is 3D, like the ships and whatnot.
Yeah. Apparently I was spot on when I said multimedia. If Anthony Cabrera is to be believed, he says collage pages made out of magazine clippings. So it's just what I thought it looked like if he's right.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's
no,
what it looks
it's
like.
awesome.
That's super cool. And it's the kind of thing that's hard to make look great for a whole comic. Like, I like that he's kind of picking and choosing when he's doing it. And it makes me wonder where else he does that and how often it happens. Because I've never seen that from Kirby.
Yeah, no, same here.
That's one of the most
Or even just
fascinating
in this
things about
period.
this. Sorry, what?
Said, or even just in this period, like I haven't seen like any of that. And it's always for something really big like that, right? Like you had that big space station
Yep.
in that image you just showed, and then Ego.
Yeah, it's establishing stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's like, look how like mind-boggling and huge this thing is.
Well, and I wonder, you always try to put yourself in the shoes of somebody reading at the period. I wonder how much more mind-blowing that is in 66. Especially if
Yeah.
you've been keeping up with Marvel. Like, imagine you buy most of what comes up on the stands, and then... Because Ego isn't just the first time we see him, it's the big character revelation at the end of an issue. And I imagine you get to that, and not only do you have the kind of mind freak of it's a living planet, it's a face in space, but it's done in this really cool multimedia style that has this massive anachronism with the 22 pages you just saw before it. That had to be fascinating.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure that blew like 1,000 8-year-olds' minds back then.
Cabrera says, yeah, Kirby would break these out for special moments. He'd do them when they're traveling to the negative zone or going to New Genesis. They're super cool. Yeah, so it's not a thing that he's just doing here.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. Clearly, I need to read more Kirby.
Yeah. Same here. Because here we are getting our minds blown, and anybody that's more familiar with his work are probably like, yeah, you guys call yourself comic fans. Cat's been doing this 14 years. He doesn't know that Kirby does multimedia pages. And then watch, you'll go back to some video where I freaked out about it somewhere else, probably. But
It's not my fault. Fantastic Four is a big blind spot.
yeah. Well, and Fantastic Four is one of those things that I own a ridiculous amount of issues of for having not read very much of it.
I finally started reading the Lee Kirby Fantastic Four. I think I got like 10 issues in. I was really liking it, but I needed to take a break because, like, out of those first 10, like 8 of them had Namor. And I was like, okay, I need a break from Namor.
Were you reading that right around Black Panther 2?
I was a little bit before, like a few months before.
Okay.
Because it was around when Multiverse of Madness came out. 'Cause it was
Okay.
after I was done reading Doctor Strange.
Because I thought I remembered when we reviewed that, you going, well, I know a little bit more about Namor now. Or I don't even know if you were on that review, but
I wasn't, because I only
somewhere
just saw that movie like a month
around
ago.
that. Oh, that's right. Yeah, you didn't go to the theater for it.
Mhm. Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I didn't think it was great, but
Mhm.
I thought it was all right.
It was better than I expected it to be. I'll give it that.
It half turns you around on Shuri. That was a win for me.
Yeah, but only in that movie.
Yeah, I know.
Not going back.
So speaking of colonizers, Austin, would you give us? Thank you very much. Would you give us a quick rundown of what happens in these 5 issues? Because this is an arc.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, yeah. Like Josh gave us the right count. Like there is a kind of a beginning, middle, and end for this, and there's very much a bookend with the Jane Foster stuff. With Thor is petitioning his father to let him get married to Jane, which is I think one of the more interesting subplots. But then there's a lot of kind of wild space sci-fi stuff that happens in the middle. So Austin, can you kind of run us through it? What happens? It's a lot of stuff.
So previously from the last arc, Thor is just getting back from fighting aliens on Pluto to save Hercules, which is maybe one of the funniest things I've ever read. It's just the first image of a comic. But so Thor goes back to Earth and he wants to marry. He goes straight to Asgard because he wants to ask Odin if he can marry Jane Foster, and Odin's finally like, "Okay, whatever, son, you can do it." But meanwhile, another this alien character named Tana Nile, she's a colonizer. There's these alien colonizers, and they're gonna take Earth, and Tana sends Jane Foster away, just away, and she gets picked up by two henchmen of the High Evolutionary. But Tannenheil like puts this lock on the Earth to move it out of orbit. So Thor has to go. Uh, well, so he doesn't go there by himself. The aliens, the colonizers take him, and they go to their planet, and he's got to get the lock removed. And
Yeah,
he
it's
shows
hilarious. He's kind of kidnapped, and then they're like, "Oh crap, we should have grabbed him. He's way more powerful than we
he's
are."
he's got some sort of hammer. Yeah, exactly. And so the aliens they decide like, hey, we have this other thing that's been attacking us in the Black Galaxy.
Yeah, that's ominous, isn't it?
Yeah, so hey Thor, do a fetch quest for us. We'll remove the lock if you go and deal with this.
He does such a
So
good job of setting all this stuff up in this issue. Like it's one of the better setup issues I've read because it's engaging all the way through, and you don't realize just how much of it is set up. But like so many balls in the air, right?
I
Like,
know it's
and
crazy.
there's this high evolutionary thing in the background. When we finally get to him, I was like, oh, that's out of nowhere, and then I went, oh wait, no, it's not. That was set up right away with what Jane Foster's doing,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
same thing with Ego being the being that is in the Black Galaxy.
Mhm. Yeah, there was a point where I was like, okay, um, there's like something in the Black Galaxy that they're afraid of, so that has to be Ego. So that's gonna be how this ties in. But I don't know how High Evolutionary ties into this, and I wasn't thinking of the Jane Foster stuff as setup. So that was
Exactly.
really interesting. Yeah.
Well, and we should have been, right? Because she gets picked up. She's not exactly kidnapped, but she gets picked up by this like old guy. She's with this really weird bald guy on an airplane whose eyes are way too low on his face. That was really strange.
Well, I was like, is this guy Egghead? Not Batman 66 Egghead, but the
Robo-
Ant-Man one.
oh, I thought you were gonna say like Robotnik.
Oh no. There's the main Ant-Man villain is Egghead.
Oh, I didn't even know that he had a villain named that. Okay.
Yeah, he's in the second Ant-Man movie for like 5 seconds. Um,
But anyway, so she
yeah.
gets picked up, and he's like, this elderly guy is like, we need you to teach our students, and she's like, I don't want to do that. He's like, but you have the aptitude, you have to. And there's a lot of foreshadowing for the evolution idea in all that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the comic really wants you to look at those two people and be like, hey, there's something not right about them.
Yeah.
Because you'll find out later on that they're not humans. Like, they are animal people.
Yeah, they're genetically engineered.
Yeah.
But intelligently, he makes them look more human than the other ones because it's a giant reveal that we've got animal people running around.
No, I think the idea, if I'm correct, is that they're supposed to be, like, shaved. Because the one guy has, like, fangs. Like, he's like a cat person. And then I don't know what the other person would be.
Okay, I didn't pick up on that. I thought the bald guy was maybe supposed to just generically be like some kind of simian something, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like maybe he's supposed to be like a gorilla person. I don't know. But anyways, yeah. So Thor has to go deal with Ego, and he takes care of that. He gets the lock removed, and the alien colonizers go back. And then he has to find Jane, who's with the High Evolutionary, who has all these animal people. And he creates the man beast.
Oh, there's the guy. There's the guy on the airplane.
Yeah. His face is like small.
I had this very like, what's wrong with your face moment, and I was like, why would Kirby draw a guy like this? It's weird. He looks like a Russian doll, but just in his head. Like if you crack his head open, there's another head like that right inside of it.
Oh, he's Humpty Dumpty.
But you're right. I didn't even pick up on that. That's really good foreshadowing. Like something is wrong with this guy.
Yeah, because when I first saw him, I was like, oh, that guy's not right. And
here's that incredible Ego page.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. And I like that he's not even like a proper planet. Like he's not like a sphere. Like it's just kind of like broken off into different stuff. Like it's real different.
Yeah.
And
No, it feels like a weird TOS episode. Or just
absolutely,
the
yeah.
very strange thing in space, like you got a big hand, or you got Abraham Lincoln, or it's like that.
I mean, if TOS could do Ego the Living Planet, that's 100% something that they would do.
Would have been
That's
perfect.
very like 60s sci-fi.
Perfect for that show, absolutely.
Exactly, yeah. And then Kirk would do his like two-hand punch on Ego.
Yeah, like Star Trek likes to act like it's real hard sci-fi, but they find ways around it to do real over-the-top stuff like that.
Well, and I think one of the reasons I like TOS more than TNG is that it's very like pulpy, and it's not as hard sci-fi. Like it's much more in that line. But
Robert says, "Why do you got to be mean to that guy, Cap? He just has a weird head." No, he doesn't though. We know that he's genetically engineered and he's weird.
His head is like a thumb with a face on it.
Anthony Cabrera says, is it Rigel a Star Trek thing? Yes, but Rigel is an actual real planet that exists. And so a lot of sci-fi things during this period would go to Rigel, and they'd go to Betelgeuse. There's 3 or 4 things like that show up. Those names will show up in everything because they're real places. And so we'll say, okay, they're, so kind of like what we do even just with Mars, right? We'll say, okay, somebody's living there.
Well, and I mean, Marvel loves to do that. Like even Titan with Thanos, like that's a moon of Saturn.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so Thor has to fight this man beast that is a wolf that has evolved by 1,000 years, which is one of those comic booky things that makes no sense.
It doesn't work at all. He's got all this knowledge he didn't have to learn. He just knows it already because he's evolved.
And he knows things from the future that haven't been invented yet.
So, he's got all this scientific knowledge, and I'm like, but your capacity doesn't give it to you.
Yeah, well, there's a really great line, I think, where the man beast is like, yeah, I'm evolved 1,000 years to the future. I know science that hasn't even been invented for you yet.
That's not how that works.
Okay.
But then something,
really cool,
he still has the bloodlust of the original wolf. I didn't really understand that.
Yeah, no, that was super comic booky.
If anything lost me, it was the man beast part.
I think the man beast thing is weird because that happens, and then the book completely forgets that the High Evolutionary is a scary idea.
Yeah.
And he suddenly becomes a good guy for the rest of the issue, and it's really strange.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I didn't mean for all this to happen. I've played God. I had hubris. I shouldn't have done all this. Even though I want to talk about this in a little bit, even though you have to put some of the blame on Thor. There's a couple of things in this where Thor doesn't take any responsibility at all for what he does because he always falls back on kind of the arrogance of I'm a god and everything I do is right. Like he totally has that. And one of those things is he shows up and distracts the High Evolutionary, and so he accidentally leaves this wolf in the chamber too long, and so he evolves like too many hundreds or thousands of years. And then at first High Evolutionary is like, Thor, you jerk, you showed up and you messed me up. It's basically like he just forgot his kitchen timer and left the roast on too long.
I left my stove on.
That's what happened. And then later he's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have monkeyed around with science that man was not meant to tamper with. And I'm like, I get the point Stan Lee is trying to make, but it's kind of heavy-handed because and it's Stan Lee, he does this kind of thing. But it feels more heavy-handed because it's like, okay, but a couple of minutes ago, the problem was just you got distracted. Somebody was messing with you. Like, if that had never happened and you kept control of everything, he would still have a case for what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then it's like, okay, bye. We're just going to go to another planet. And Thor is like, they're the High Evolutionary and his new men go to form their own society. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
And I'm like, not really. Like, he's a weird, crazy person.
And then the exact same thing kind of happens in the last issue where Thor, traps Jane Foster in a room. I'm getting ahead of myself, with her new Asgardian powers. And they've got this creature called the Unknown, and then to help Jane Foster when she screams one time, he like leaves the door open and the Unknown gets out, and he doesn't take any responsibility for that either.
Yeah,
this is all Thor's fault.
Thor's very meat-headed.
Yeah, and he always wins by just, well, I've got this hammer.
I'm so powerful.
He's just more powerful than anything. Okay, let's backtrack for a minute because so many things are coming to me as we're talking about this. With what you were talking about with High Evolutionary, he's introduced as real ominous. Like, they walk in, and Jane Foster is already there and is like a tutor for the students, for the animal students. And she goes, I mean, what's the big deal? He's just trying to evolve all these animals to be sentient. Like, he doesn't seem to be doing anything, malevolent or sadistic or anything. And Thor goes, like, but I smell something amiss. You know, like something's really off. There's more to it than that. And then there's not, like, at all.
Well, and like they kind of, and by kind of I mean pretty much entirely kidnap Jane Foster, and they're like, "You're gonna teach for us."
Yeah, that's true.
And they never really address that again. Like, it's really strange.
No, you're right. I mean, like, I'm not saying he doesn't do anything like improper, and he is playing God in multiple ways. But the attitude the book has about it is his heart was in the right place. It was kind of just a road to hell situation, as opposed to, no, he's actually sinister, and he just doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it is the absolute inverse of what Gunn does with this character.
That's what I was about to say. It's funny because one of the big deals they've made in promoting that movie is like he's not sympathetic in any way.
Yeah.
You get to this issue and Stanley and Kirby at a certain point forget that he's like a bad guy.
Well, they give him a tragic backstory that we're supposed to be kind of sad by, and I'm like, no, all those scientists that didn't want him monkeying around with genetic engineering were kind of right, where they're like, oh, they thought my science was too fringe, and I'm like, that's because your science was really fringe.
Well, his like sad backstory too is that he turned a Dalmatian into a human and somebody shot it.
Yeah, he goes, I took my pet Dalmatian, as you do, and I experimented on it, and basically somehow turned the Dalmatian into what looked like an anthropomorphized cheetah.
I had he's like a cheetah man.
I don't know why you didn't just say it was, there it is. I don't know why you didn't just say it was a cheetah in the first, but well, I guess he wasn't gonna have a pet cheetah. He's got a cheetah plantation.
Whoever did the coloring messed that up. Yeah.
Jumping around a little bit, I had never heard, and again, I've not read early Thor, so this might just be a thing that everybody knows about but me, but I had never heard the hammer referred to before as the Uru hammer.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know about that. That comes out up 4 or 5 times, and I don't think he ever says Mjolnir.
So the Uru thing is, I think, the metal that it's made out of.
Oh, okay.
I want to say we've said that in the movies before, but I could be wrong.
Maybe so, but he never pronounces, he never proclaims it. Like,
yeah,
I'm gonna
it's
throw
not
something.
like that, yeah.
I'm going to hit this with my Uru hammer. But there might have been like a throwaway line in the first in the first movie where it's like, Thor has to be worthy to hold this, and by the way, it's made of this metal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, that's just Stanley heroes in general. They're always proclaiming things.
Yeah.
Especially when they're attacking.
Well, and there's a lot of fun names for all kinds of stuff in this. There's a lot of fun like gadgets and like kind of Deus Ex Machina devices. Like on the same level as, I guess they're not all Deus Ex Machinas, but like, and not necessarily MacGuffins. We got like plot device kinds of like weapons and gadgets on the same level as like the ultimate nullifier. And I think my favorite is the Discordian. And I wish it was shaped like an accordion, because that's all I could think about. Because it's supposed to like incapacitate the wolf creature.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like this gigantic Rob Liefeld gun that he whips out, and he's like, "Here, this emits a noise that will kill him."
And it doesn't work. He just stands there and he's like, this is really unpleasant. But
He's like,
I'm
"This is."
so evolved. I can handle it, no problem.
He's like, "This is really annoying. It just makes you want to kill people more."
Anthony Cabrera says the Uru name was invented by Larry Lieber. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Larry Lieber, I think, does a lot of the early Thor stuff.
But yeah, the high evolutionary thing was one of the more perplexing. Where by the end of it, I'm like, is he a villain? I don't know if he's actually the bad guy.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he doesn't like he gets like an ending. Like it's not like, oh, he might come back someday.
He and Ego both get endings.
Yeah.
Well, sort of. So at first, Ego's looks like an ending because he's like, he basically goes, I'm very embarrassed. I don't want to take over the universe anymore. Like, Thor bests him inside the black galaxy or whatever. And he's, and at first, and like, his motivation is not that far removed from what it is in Guardians 2.
No, I had that a lot. So there's way more of that issue in Guardians 2 than I would have expected. Like I didn't
Again,
realize...
the total opposite from High Evolutionary, who is not at all that character.
No, the only thing that's there is the animal people thing. That's kind of it.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, you have like, I didn't realize that he could make himself into a person that early.
I didn't know that either.
His whole thing is he wants to basically take over the galaxy. He wants to make pieces of himself and shoot them off into the universe to take over everything.
Yep.
Like I said, that the shot of his like face on a wall reminded me of the climax of that movie.
Yeah, I had that too.
And I'm trying to remember, is there a part where like Thor starts to like sink into the planet like that? I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
But I think there's like some stuff like that where like the actual planet's kind of attacking him.
But it also just gets weird and somewhat disturbing in the same way that movie does. Like, I thought Ego was a total reinvention for that movie, and like, not exactly.
Mm-hmm. No, he's reinvented to like fit the themes and like what's going on in that movie. But for the most part, like, it is Ego. Like,
yeah, and his name is that for much the same reason. Like, it's not exactly the same thing as in that movie where he wants to make the whole universe himself. It is kind of a standard take over the universe plot before it's, like, trying to make the whole universe in his image, or at least it's not really talked about in that way, but it's still that same kind of level of egotism. Like, you know, like the grand ultimate narcissist. He does have that.
Yeah, no, it's similar in that in the movie, Ego like puts a piece of himself on all these planets, and like he's gonna like grow it out so that those planets become Ego. While here, he's just going to make different like human versions of himself to like fly off and take over planets.
And he's not trying to create offspring or anything.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, because he can kind of just create like armies of people here. But
yeah, because they do the whole antibody thing.
mm-hmm. Well, you get one of my favorite moments where he's like, I'm gonna make like a perfect human that can beat Thor, and then he makes like 30 and they knock Thor over, and the guy's like, hey, you cheated, that wasn't 1-on-1. And he goes like, you're right, I'll just wait till he gets back up.
Yeah, they're like Power Ranger buddies.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that moment's really funny because he basically uses Thor's likeness in order to create what he calls antibodies to fight Thor. And I like how his inner workings kind of work sort of like human inner workings. And then he goes, well, I don't need you anymore because I needed your likeness to make these things. Now you're expendable, so I'm going to use them to kill you. But I guess to hang on to them in case this happens again. And then by the end, again, he just goes, I am really embarrassed about this whole thing, and I'm never leaving. But the reason I say that it's not the same thing as High Evolutionary is he seems totally done, like he's kind of hanging it up. And with Ego, it's also I'm going to hang it up, but then Galactus is coming now. And Galactus wants to go into the Black Galaxy and destroy whatever life is inside. I guess because it's a planet? I just had that thought. Is that what it is? Like, he knows there's a planet in there?
No, and I thought it was really cool that Kirby and Stan Lee, like, they make this Living Planet character, and then they immediately, without fault, go, okay, now let's throw Galactus at him, because that's like the most obvious thing to do with Ego.
And yet, I didn't see it coming.
No, I didn't either, because I feel like I've heard people like a million times be like, how have we never had Galactus fight Ego? No, we did. You just haven't read it.
Yeah, it's the first thing they did with him. It's the second thing they did with him.
It's immediately set up.
Well, what's funny is I didn't see Galactus coming because I just didn't think that they would have the audacity to follow Ego up with that, because they're such huge ideas, and also because I don't want to say red herring, but there's maybe an intentional line that throws you off the path if you're thinking about Galactus, because and it's intelligent because it comes from Ego himself, so it's not necessarily the book saying it, but or does it come from Ego? I can't remember if it's Ego or if it's just internal monologue. I forget, but there's a line about Ego that's like, he is the like grandest, most powerful, be all end all like being of the universe, and I'm sitting here going, what about Galactus? Oh, okay, I guess we've forgotten about Galactus, and then 3 pages later, there's Galactus. Like, you did that so I wouldn't think about Galactus, right? That's why that's there.
Well, I think Kirby was like, Stan, what's the idea for the next issue? And then Stan was like, who would win in a fight? Ego or Galactus?
He goes, I remember when I created Galactus. That's right, Stan, you did do that. Well, he's out there. Throw him in the book.
Go make 22 pages about that.
Don't fill his arms in yet. I like him short-sleeved.
Yeah, why doesn't he have sleeves?
He didn't in his first appearance either.
Oh, does he not?
No,
okay.
no, he's not. And his midsection is less like a kilt now, so like we fixed that. He's filled in the legs, unless that's just the lighting. I can't actually tell. But he's still short-sleeved, so I guess his full-on look that we're used to later doesn't come until after this, and maybe it's the next time we see him, maybe it's the next time he's in Fantastic Four, because I think he's got that look by, what is it, like 84? It's somewhere in there is the second appearance of Galactus past the trilogy, because I own that, it's in the 70s or 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're getting back
number-wise,
in Fantastic Four
is what I mean. It didn't take decades to get back to Galactus. I mean numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's right here.
But when I said bittersweet, no, I just mean in Fantastic Four.
No, I know.
When I say bittersweet, I got so excited we had a full-page spread of Galactus. And then, at the top of the page, we've got this narration box from Stan Lee, because Stan Lee likes to insert himself, and you can tell it's Stan talking. It's not just, like, generic narrator. It's Stan Lee talking to you. We get meta with it in places, too, where he's like, I've got more power than Thor with his hammer, because I've got the power of narrative
with his Uru mallet.
And anyway, at the top of the page here, I'm paraphrasing, Stan Lee's like, we're gonna put a pin in this, we're gonna leave Galactus for now. And then I get to the end of the 5 issues, and Galactus hasn't come back yet, and I'm like, oh man, I'm not gonna get to talk about that tonight. I don't know what happens with him and Ego in the Black Galaxy.
Yeah, because I was talking to Josh about it while I was reading it, and I was like, oh man, so that's going to be the last issue of this, right? And he was like, no, that happens later. And I was like, oh damn.
That happens later. Yeah, so that was kind of sad. Not that it's a problem, because he's, Kirby, and I feel like you probably have to give more credit to Kirby for this kind of thing than Lee. Like, he's setting so much up. Like, he's got all these balls in the air, and then he catches some of them, and then he throws some new ones.
Yeah.
And this is how you do, what do you call it, a run.
Yeah. No, these 6 issues work really well as a story, but it is just like an overall run. Like, it is... There's stuff before this, there's stuff after this.
Absolutely.
So, like, not everything's going to pay off.
Well, and I think we think of earlier Marvel as serialized, but not this serialized, where there's a lot more sophisticated, like, 70s and 80s level world building and ongoing narrative going on here than in some other things I've read from this time. Like, I feel like it's even... in some ways better at it than some of the Spider-Man I've read from this period.
No, absolutely. This reminds me, and it's maybe a little different because it is more of like an arc within like a few issues. But it reminds me a bit of like Ditko Doctor Strange. Where, like you hit a certain point in Ditko Doctor Strange, and it's like 20 issues that are all like one story being told over time.
Yeah. It's really impressive. And again, it's cool because if you're a kid and you pick up one issue of this, you get enough to enjoy for half an hour, 45 minutes, and you're not going to be lost looking at any of it. But if you read it all together, I don't feel like the recapping is too in your face. I mean, it's way better at it than what I've read in the first year or two of Marvel. Like, I think Lee is getting better at those, where he's not spending too much time explaining to you what happened last time. He'll put it in the initial splash page, and then doesn't feel like he's got to do the 90s Spider-Man flashback constantly to things you've seen already thing.
No, it probably because he's writing like 18 books at this point, so he's like, I don't have time to remember what happened.
But also, because of that, they could make this stuff so much more decompressed, and they don't. And like, you got to give both of those guys a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was places in both the ego part and the high evolutionary part where I was like, okay, this is definitely going to be more than one issue, right? Where like, there's no way they're going to wrap all of this up in one issue, and then they do.
Yeah.
And like, none of them feel rushed, I don't think.
What's weird is, and somebody alluded to this in the comments, both of these villains feel like the major villains, if you can call High Evolutionary a villain right now, because that's debatable. But
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
But both of them feel like that Kirby and Lee think they're throwaway villains right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I also think it's really interesting that they're back to back, because you have the God of Thunder,
and they're actually being developed at the same time. You just don't know it.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think it's really interesting that you have the God of Thunder, then he fights a giant like god in like the form of a planet.
Yeah.
And then the immediate next threat is a man who becomes a god. And I think that's really interesting that it kind of worked out in that way.
And then the very next thing that happens is his girlfriend becomes a god and can't handle it.
Yeah.
So that's all intentional.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, because I hadn't really put that together.
And the arc before this is Hercules, so there's definitely a lot of that stuff going around.
Well, with this kind of stuff, I always like to talk about the notion of relative godhood, where you have characters that are mortal in that they can be killed, and that the more powerful you are, the easier it is to get away with calling yourself a god. Like, or how different are the rules for immortality and what you are like as your species. But from Thor's perspective, there is this stark contrast between what a mortal is and what a god is, and to the point where Odin doesn't believe that you can even be a mortal and marry a god. So for them, it is not relative. And even characters that are powerful enough that a civilization that is less powerful would probably call you a god, or maybe even worship you unto a god, they wouldn't think it counts. Like, Thor's not going to count High Evolutionary as a god just because he's built his own civilization of animal people and has done that with science. He's still a mortal. He still could not marry a god. But like, to the animal people, he probably is a god.
Well, and to the animal people, he's more of a god than Thor is, because it's not like Thor's like created, a race of people like that.
Yeah. So the relativism of that has always been interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that
absolutely.
This is kind of about that, but from the perspective of our protagonist, it's super black and white.
Mm. Yeah,
Like, exactly. I like that our main character is really oblivious to a lot of the nuances of what's going on in the story. Like, he
just wants his girlfriend back.
Yeah, almost like an unreliable narrator in Thor, where the story is much more complex and intricate, and there's shades of gray in some of these ideas and in some of the morality of it. But for Thor, like, nothing shakes his belief system anywhere in this. he is sad at the end that he can't be with Jane Foster, and we'll get into that because we didn't actually break that part of it down. But what ends up happening right at the end? Because I thought he was gonna like go against his father. I thought he was gonna rebel and then go to Earth to try to be with her, and instead she seems to be written out entirely, and he is rewarded for staying the course and I guess just being the hero and saving the day a few times in this arc by immediately being given Sif as a potential love interest.
Well, and is part of that like the Dark World of it all? Because there's a lot of that in Dark World.
I was going to ask you if you thought that the writers of Dark World had looked at specifically this material.
I think
I'm assuming that's her first appearance.
For what, sorry?
For Sif.
Oh yeah, I think so.
It plays as an introduction for that character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think so. But when they give Jane her god powers, she's got like this green costume, and if I remember correctly, isn't her like the robe she's given when she goes to Asgard in that movie green? It's not that exact costume, but I want to say it's the colors, but I could be wrong.
It's been too long, and I've almost never stayed awake through that movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But it's weird because it's that, but it also feels like the basis for Jane Foster Thor.
Yep, I had that too.
Mm-hmm.
Again, real educational, this stuff. All these ideas that you thought came from some of the more recent popular places that pre-exist that stuff.
Yeah, and I kind of like this more than Jane Foster Thor just because I've always found that weird because that's not a mantle, that's a person. I like that she's just given her own god powers. And
I like the revelation that it turns out to be Jane Foster with Jane Foster Thor, but the idea that you get to call yourself Thor when Thor exists is very strange. Never understood that.
Yeah, no, that's all weird to me. I don't know. But I thought this stuff was cool, and I mean it's also a like, hey, Jane Foster Thor is a dumb idea. Like, this is why she can't be a god. So I thought that was kind of fun.
Well, and some people, looking at it with modern sensibilities, might say, well, but that's because the sensibilities of the time were the woman's got to be more subservient to the man or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think they immediately remove any like doubts on that by introducing Sif as being Thor's equal.
Yeah, that's a good point. But there's a lot of talk about like human females.
Oh, well, and it's very much a 60s book where it's like
it's a product of its time, certainly.
Absolutely, yeah.
My favorite bit is when Jane Foster talks about her female curiosity.
Oh yeah. Mine is when she gets to Asgard and she's afraid of everything, and then she sees Heimdall and she's like, "Oh my god, he has a sword and horns."
She looks around because Kirby draws, of course, this intricate landscape with all kinds of crazy things happening. The Rainbow Bridge is there, and she goes, "How are you guys not all freaking out right now? This is crazy." But then, what is the test that they give her with her powers? It's crazy. So, like, she can fly. We haven't broken any of this down, but the idea is that Odin, because Odin is very morally ambiguous, and he seems to be kind of a master manipulator here, where he may or may not have set up this whole thing to prove to Thor that Jane Foster is actually not worthy of him. So the big question at the end of this is, did he give Thor his blessing 5 issues ago to marry Jane Foster because he intended to immediately give her powers, make her a god, knowing that she couldn't handle it, and then he could say, like, "Thor, I told you so," and then that would finish that whole thing? Or did he not actually know what was going to happen, and it was indeed because you can't marry Thor and not be a god? And I mean, they don't get into this, but he's got a point, because she'd be with Thor for her lifespan, and then she'd grow old, and then, like, you wouldn't have a great life together. So there's a good bit of logic to support that idea.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, Odin becomes like Tinder in this,
Yeah.
where he splits them up and then immediately gives both of them their like soulmate.
Yeah, that's true. By the end, he kind of gives both of them what they always wanted.
hmm Yeah, and it's really cool because
And that's supposed to be
Thor,
his compassionate side,
Mhm.
but
yeah,
there is some manipulation that he does to get there.
yeah,
But then
absolutely.
you have that question of, again, that moral kind of relativism thing where it's like, okay, but does he earn that by actually being a god, by actually being an all-father, the all-father? And then I guess it's up to each individual person to say, well, you know, morality is morality.
Mhm. Yeah,
Versus,
absolutely.
well, no, he is a god. I guess if you are almost a capital G god, then you get to make up morality. Now then we get into the philosophy of, you know, is God good because of what he does, or is what he does good because he's God, and that whole thing.
Yeah, yeah, and so he gives Thor a woman that's his equal in Sif, and then he gives Jane Donald Blake, but without Thor,
Yep,
basically.
and
So
it
I
wiped her
yeah,
memory of everything, I guess.
yeah. She just kind of wakes up and goes, "Oh, I'm in a hospital in a place I don't know. I guess I work here."
Exactly. No, that was hilarious. I would assume that it's a good long time after this before we see Jane Foster again.
I would
This
imagine
this felt like
so.
a huge status quo shakeup for a book that I've not been reading.
Yeah.
So
No, I
it's
imagine
like,
so.
because
And
I've
I know
never
he
really
gets married to
read the.
Sif.
Sorry, what?
And I know he gets married to Sif at some point. So like I feel like that probably sticks for a long time.
Yeah, I've never really read the Donald Blake stuff, and this felt like it was finally trying to shoot itself away from all of that. Because at no point does he even use his alter ego at all in these 5 issues.
No, and we never get that annoying thing that I don't like about early Thor, because I'm not a big Donald Blake fan, but I've always found it annoying in like the early issues where it's like, oh no, I let go of my hammer for like 10 seconds. Now I'm Donald Blake and I gotta get to my hammer really quickly before the villain gets me. And like we don't have any of that. It's just Thor doing his thing.
It feels like an episodic television premise, doesn't it?
hmm Absolutely, yeah.
Like that's what you do on TV because you can't have him be in costume all the time.
hmm
And
Yeah.
you don't want to constantly do effects with the hammer.
I'm sure Donald Blake gets a lot of screen time in that 70s Hulk
I
movie.
bet so. That's the one I haven't watched yet.
I've only seen one clip of it, and it's who I think is Donald Blake, like picking up Thor's hammer and bashing Thor with it, and I have no idea what's happening. So,
I think story wise, my favorite of these issues probably is this last one.
oh yeah, the Jane one.
Yeah, I just like the way that's plotted, and
It is really cool.
it was kind of unpredictable, and I like the status quo that it gets to at the end. But the ego stuff, like visually, art wise, that's probably the best issue.
Yeah, it's hard to say because I want to say the Ego one is my favorite, but I can see where you're coming from because that one isn't super plot focused because it's a lot of like, okay, we're on Ego, now he's throwing this at you, he's throwing that at you, and there's not a lot of like character and like plot happening.
Yeah, I was certainly more emotionally invested when you got to this part, and I felt like
Yeah.
Thor was kind of just a device to make the world building happen.
hmm Although the Ego issue does have the Observer who just walks around going, "I observe that this is happening," and that was fun.
One last thing I wanted to mention is right at the start, this has that issue of conveniently forgetting that there are other superheroes in this universe, which is ironic given that we're introducing so many villains that nobody thinks of as Thor villains. But particularly, we haven't talked about them very much, but particularly the colonizers, where uh they're like, well, we can't take over the Earth if Thor is there, and so the main colonizer, who was pretending to be human, it was Jane Foster's roommate, and I guess her human name is just her name.
Yeah, I really thought she was gonna get an alien name, and then she doesn't.
That's her name. It's pretty ambiguous, right? It can be a human name or an alien name. It's kind of like the Kara thing.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. It's comics.
Just a Tana something. And so she turns into what looks like you said when we were talking about this privately that it looked kind of like MODOK.
Yeah, it was like MODOK with regular limbs, and you said Galactus, which is
Which is
funny
weird because then he shows up.
because he shows up.
Part of
Yeah.
it's because she's purple. Sorry, I got to roll all the way back so you guys can see this.
That is true. She's the one purple one, and all the others are green. Oh! And there's also the aliens have like these enforcer guys that are like super strong, and they're just titanium man, but with a face.
Yeah,
And I thought that was really funny.
yeah, that's true. And what were they called? They were like
Oh, it's like in something.
it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of it.
Yeah. Crap, I can't think of what it is, but it something indestructible, whatever.
No, not indestructible.
It's not
So were they-
indestructible, but it's
it's
something
like that
that.
though. They're
Yeah.
not invincibles. I don't know what they're. Maybe they were indestructible. I can't remember. But it's something.
Yeah.
It's real on the nose. It's real obvious. But anyway,
Looks
so
like they have observers and colonizers. All of their names are on the nose.
pretty on the nose. Yeah, that's
It's
also a
also
very TOS
funny-
kind of thing, though.
Yeah, it's also funny too with the Galactus thing because you have like the big planet thing, and the Galactus story is where the Watcher comes from, and with this Thor has the Observer who is just there to observe.
Just a watcher. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. That's a good call. But yeah, so her whole plan is, like send Jane off so that Thor will just spend all his time looking for her, while meanwhile the colonizers can take over the planet. And I'm like, there's other superheroes that are gonna try to stop you.
yeah, like the Fantastic Four is gonna show up. But I love how like this whole bit, like this page that's on the screen, it's like right out of a Gun thing. Like if Gun was on Earth, you have like the alien that's like, I rule all of you. And she just meets a cop and she's like, I rule you. And they take her to the precinct and they're like, yeah, we don't know what to do with this person. She just keeps telling us that she rules us.
What makes it even funnier is it's like a full 2 issues before you see her again, and she's still just hanging out with those cops.
Yeah. And it's also awesome because Thor comes back with some of them and their ship's on the roof and they're like, okay, we're gonna take you back. And the cops are just like, there's nothing on the roof, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, what's weird is when you get back to her at the end, she's all upset because her people have said, we didn't talk about this earlier, but her people have said that you have to stop trying to colonize the Earth. You've got to, I'm going to quote the Tick, put the moon back, demon waif. It's basically like that with the Earth. Put the moon back, put the Earth back. And she's like, oh, why do I have to do that? Like this is my right. I'm supposed to colonize. And the other the lead elderly colonizer guy who's like the smartest of them, so he has to be the leader. It's the whole like he resist the call. He doesn't really want to have to do it, but he's got the highest IQ, so he has to. And he makes a deal with Thor that says, well, if you help us with ego, then we'll leave your planet alone. So he basically calls her up and is like, okay, you gotta drop the whole thing. And she's like, well, did I do anything wrong? And they're like, no, you did everything you were supposed to. And I'm like, no, that's not true, though, because there was that line earlier about how if they'd done more of their due diligence, they'd know that Thor was there and could stop them. But she didn't do any research ahead of time, so she just attacked the Earth. And I guess it's weird because she did know about Thor because she just happened to be roommate of his girlfriend and just thought it was enough to send her off and didn't do anything else. So like, nah, she was a little sloppy in this alien invasion she was attempting.
well, the best part about that whole thing is they're like, okay, we're gonna take you back to our planet, and she's like, oh, like, like I messed up this. I was gonna rule Earth. Like, what do I do now? And they're like, it's okay. It's even better because because what you did sent Thor to us when he got rid of Ego. Now our emperor's gonna marry you, and she's like, "Yay! I've always loved him since I was a child."
Yeah.
It's really
Everybody
funny.
gets a love interest they're into at the end of this.
Yeah,
It's
Ego needed one.
It's a happy ending. Yeah, Ego got Galactus.
Yeah. Oh, that's an abusive relationship right there.
AMC wants to know if we might do some blind commentaries on Spider-Man Unlimited soon. And we've talked about that for a long time. And given that all of a sudden stuff from that is showing up, maybe we should think about front-loading that at some point and doing that with, you know, Counter-Earth and all that.
Yeah, the High Evolutionary is like the main villain of that show, I think.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
And I can't remember if they call that Counter-Earth, but it's the same idea.
I think so. I think it is called Counter-Earth.
That was the first place I had seen that. When I was in the theater for Guardians 3, I was kind of shocked about Counter-Earth because I was like, oh, we're at Spider-Man Unlimited right now. I mean, I was sure it was out of the comics, but I was like, this is weird. I feel like I'm seeing a live-action adaptation of Spider-Man Unlimited that, like Sony, does not have Spider-Man in it.
Spider-Man Unlimited also has the greatest cartoon ending of all time. Where Spider-Man's like looking at a computer and he's like, "Oh no, Counter-Earth's exploding. We have 20 seconds to like get out of here." And then it like cuts to black, and that's just the end of the show.
Oh yeah, well they thought they were getting another season.
No, I know, but it's so funny.
I'm sure that would have made perfect sense.
Yeah, I'm sure they could have written
Well,
themselves.
Jareth,
out.
I've got the gong. I wasn't going to use it tonight because that's my plan at the moment is to use the gong when we get super chats, and nobody's left a super chat tonight. But I do indeed. If you want to see it here, I was gonna unveil this in the Captain Logan show, but I've got the gong. It's right here. So we get super chats. We got gong. Is that exciting?
That was one gong for Ego right there.
Oh yeah, Ego. We'll do one for the not so villainous High Evolutionary. Good job, High Evolutionary. You get a
job,
gong.
Maybe good guy High Evolutionary.
That was awkward. Anyway, this was wonderful. I'm so glad we got to talk about this.
Yeah, this is just like really fun, classic 60s comics.
It made me go, why do we review anything newer than like the last 20 years, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because I've read almost all of Stan Lee's runs on characters. It's just FF, Daredevil, and a lot of Thor that I haven't read, I think, at this point. So it was very much like, oh yeah, like I really like this period of comics. It's really fun.
Austin, next time. Oh, Anthony Cabrera left a super chat. Thanks. Now I gotta do the gong, and he just says gong. Gong.
Gong. Clark.
That's not gonna Clark. That's not gonna get old. Anyway, next time on the ReQuest, we're doing Next. Next time, it's Next, which is a movie from 2007 that I've never seen. Sorry,
it's funny because you told me before the show that's what we were doing, and I completely forgot. So I was like, "Next what?"
I love how I got you with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
whose line's on first?
That's a request from Tom. It's a movie called Next that I remember seeing previews for, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I just know it's got Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
Do you think it has The Who?
No, I don't.
Who?
The band on stage.
Okay.
That's the Animaniacs joke. Anyway, thanks again for being here, folks. We're going to get going now, but we will see you again next time, and Thursday night I will be back for a Captain Logan show. Friday night, Austin and I are going to do the Suicide Squad commentary, and Sunday, if everything goes according to plan, we're going to finally review Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So lots of stuff here on the channel this week. I'll be off tomorrow. I was supposed to do a game stream with Jonathan Ying, and he had to put it off for a little bit, so hopefully the next 2 or 3 weeks we can get to that. And in the meantime, I was Captain Logan. We had Austin, the Day Ghost.
Although I could step in for him and take his place, and
I don't even know how that would work.
I could wear a disguise.
Yeah, but like you don't even have the game. I don't even know how we do that.
Fake mustache.
Fake mustache. Bye, everybody. See you later.
Yeah.